delighted to be able to finally, after trying for some time, for the past 2-3 years, to organize an academic chapter, thanks to the leadership of Jaber Salah and with the participation of Hossein Nourzad and Pedro Neves. It has been, this is a fresh new start. We are really excited about it at WAP because we think that the research that can be carried out in our field is very important. There are always case studies that are taking place, that are coming out. They need to be investigated. They need to be verified and validated. We see a lot of problems that take place. They need to be documented. But also, I'm very excited, and we all are at WAP, that we are starting this program as well to partner with universities, therefore increasing the ecosystem, the academic ecosystem around the academic side of public-private partnership. I will really, without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Jaber to say a few words, and then introduce the moderator and panelists. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ziad, and thanks to who support us, and welcome to our panelists for today's sessions. I will handle the webinar to Hussein as moderators.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Jaber and Ziad, for your introduction. I'm very glad to be here with you guys for the inaugural webinar of academic chapter of WAP. As Jaber said, we are very glad that we initiated this journey of joining the academic and practitioners through WAP. As you all know, we have our webinar title, Bridging the Gap, Connecting Research and Practice in Public-Private Partnership. We as academicians and also our friends as practitioners all know that there have been like an extensive body of research about public-private partnership, thousands of research papers published globally. And despite this vast body of knowledge, still significant gap remains in applying academic insights into practice. And I remember a few months ago, we were in Turkey in UNECE 8th Forum for Public-Private Partnership. And in that session, there was a session by Pedro who they discussed how we can take out PPP out of the classroom. And this webinar, which is the inaugural webinar of WAP, still we want to make this more clear for our audience and to initiate the process. So today I'm honored to be the moderator of this session. My name is Hossein Nourzad, and I'm an assistant professor of infrastructure management at University of Tehran. I also teach for the World Bank PPP certification throughout the world in several countries, especially in Europe, in Portugal. And I'm also honored to introduce our distinguished speakers, Professor Michael Garvin, who is the David Burrows Professor of Construction Engineering via Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Virginia Tech, and also Dr. Carter Casady, who is a research engineer at the Center for Sustainable Development and Global Competitiveness from Stanford University. So now I would like to ask our distinguished speakers to say hello to our friends, and then we can start from there. Mike, go ahead, please.
Sure, Hussein. So thanks very much for this invitation to be a part of this webinar. Just a little bit about me. As Hussein mentioned, I'm a professor at Virginia Tech. I've been at Virginia Tech for now 20 years, been in the academic world for almost 25, 30 years now. And, during that time frame, I've looked at project delivery very broadly, over the course of my career, and for a good portion of it, I've focused my research on public-private partnerships. So I'm really excited to be here to share some of my experiences, with about this topic of connecting academia and practice.
Thank you. And Carter, I know that Carter's time zone is very early. It's 7 a.m. So please, Carter, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. I hope you can hear me okay. Yeah, just a little bit more about myself. I haven't been doing this as long as Mike, but I've been in academia for a while now, and really the core of a lot of my research has been focused primarily on public-private partnerships, anything from planning and procurement to governance, performance, institutional development, market maturation, those types of things. So I'm really excited to, join this webinar, kind of continue this discussion about how academics can link up more closely with industry and share best practices and so forth. And those two groups can inform each other going forward, because I do think there's a major need to continue those.
Perfect. Thank you, Carter. And if I want to just let our audience know about the timetable after this introduction, we will have an hour for our speaker's presentation, in which I will ask some questions about the topic of this webinar. And then our speakers will share their idea and opinion. And then we will have the Q&A session, in which the question that we have received, in addition to the question that you will share us in the Q&A section of this webinar, will be asked from our speakers. And then after that, we will basically finalize our discussion about the WAP Academic Next, which is the initiative, the recent initiative by the academic chapter. And then we will close the session. So let me start with the first question with Mike. And in my first question, Mike, I would like to focus on identification of the gap, because if we want to bridge the gap, first of all, we need to know better about the gap, why it is there, and what is the cause and root cause of that gap, and then we can think about how we can bridge that gap. So in the first question, I want to ask you, what do you perceive as the primary reasons for the gap between academic research and practical applications in public-private partnership? And it would be very great if you can share any specific examples from your experience for us to better identify the gap.
Sure, Hussein. So, I think there's multiple ways that I think that you could answer this question, because I think there are a variety of factors that are influencing or have an impact on this gap. And one of them that I think is probably at least very prominent here in the United States, and that's where the majority of my experience is, that unfortunately, I think we're still in a situation where practitioners in particular are still in what I would call an advocacy mode, right? They're advocating for the use of public-private partnerships or other project delivery methods, and they're not as focused on what I would say evidence. And I speak oftentimes with practitioners about this sort of dilemma, in that, from my perspective, one of the biggest friends that they have with potentially trying to advocate, for increased utilization of PPPs or whatnot is the evidence that they can work in certain circumstances and so forth. And so I think that's one of the issues, at least from my perspective. Another issue, I think that I've had significant sort of, I think trouble with is, again, when you're trying to conduct this research, you need to engage with practitioners, and oftentimes they're fairly reticent about, sharing data, to be quite honest. So getting data out of practitioners is not, is not been the easiest thing to do over the course of my career. A lot of the data that we rely upon is qualitative, and getting good qualitative data in and of itself is a challenge. It's and then if we start talking about quantitative data, I think it starts to get even, become a bigger challenge, particularly if you're trying to look at large data sets. Yes, there are some large data sets out there, for sure. But the reliability of that data, I think sometimes is questionable. And then there's only so much you can do with some of the large data sets that are out there. So those are a couple of the factors that I would sort of mention. And then I guess the other thing that I would close with is that, PPPs are complex. When you look at all the factors that are involved in PPPs, from things at the policy level down to the implementation level, if you want to answer a question, a basic question such as, how did a PPP perform? That's actually a complex question to answer. And so, it's not so easy to say, well, factor A and B, cause C, I think, when you're talking about PPP. So those are some of my thoughts about why this gap exists.
Thank you. And Carter, would you like to go ahead and add your ideas about that, please?
Yeah, sure. I actually agree somewhat wholeheartedly with Mike in this respect on a number of these issues, because I think first and foremost, to kind of the last point Mike made, trying to, if we talk about performance, that's one thing. Mike said, yeah, it's been somewhat apparent that a lot of the practitioner community has been very focused on PPP advocacy. Understandably, it's a lot of this is directly tied to the work that they are designed to do. But at the same time, we've had a lot of difficulty trying to put forward an empirical evidence base to justify the usage of PPP models around the world. And I'm not just, when I mean evidence base, I mean sort of a large empirical evidence base that's, very robust and you can conduct some statistical analysis on, versus, single case studies in individual markets and countries. A lot of the academic literature is saturated with case studies, and we can learn a lot from different countries around the world to understand best practices. But when it comes to systematically comparing relative performance of different delivery models and things of that sort, that's where we seem to fall short. And so I think a lot of the points that Mike raised are actually all interconnected. The fact that we have difficulty putting forward an evidence base because we also have limited access to data, and we can't readily get that data and in a very systematic way. And then some of the data sources that are available are inherently limited in terms of what we can actually analyze. So I think that confluence of factors are sort of all sort of mutually reinforcing to a certain respect. Meaning, since we don't have data, we can't conduct the performance, and since we can't get access to the data, we can't sort of marginally improve those efforts. I think some of that is changing a little bit. I did some work with some folks in the Netherlands trying to assess the empirical evidence base. We compiled a book of all the empirical studies on PPPs that we could possibly find to try and understand whether they were exhibiting certain performance advantages. What we sort of found was there seemed to be some quality differences and benefits to schedule delivery, cost being a little bit more of a nuanced issue. But I mean, that's that's still a very nascent area of research that needs a lot more attention because we're very short on evaluative efforts. And then to Mike's last point, yeah, there's a more fundamental question about the complexity of what you're evaluating. So even when you're doing these types of analyses and trying to understand and make conclusions about this, you have to be very clear about what sort of evaluative criteria you're using, because the success of a project could be very different depending on which stakeholders you're talking to. The success of a PPP could be viewed one way by the public sector and very differently by the private sector, depending on where the benefits are accruing in any given project. So I think those complexities are really important. I'm really happy that Mike brought that up.
Great, thank you. I mean, it was very interesting to hear these very major points. And the beauty of what I can hear now is what you shared with us has both soft and hard side. From the soft side, I would say engaging with practitioners, and in more general terms, stakeholder engagement is an issue, even when we talk about academic and practitioner collaborations. On the harder side, I would say what you shared with us about the evidence-based research or the data in terms of the qualitative data and the reliability of data is interesting to hear. And I would also like to add that what I think will stimulate the problems that you mentioned is the interdisciplinary nature of this domain of PPP projects. Even in this session, we have like engineers, we have from some friends as economists, some from law background, and also from management background. This is also another important matter in terms of complexity. Okay, so thank you so much, my friends, for helping us to identify the gap. Now that we have a better idea of the root cause of this gap, the gap between research and practice in public-private partnership, let us go and a little bit share our opinions about bridging the gap. Now, my question is, in your opinion, what are the most effective strategies to bridge the gap between PPP research and practice? And I would also like you to let us know, are there any existing models or frameworks that have successfully addressed this issue in a specific region or country or so? So please.
Hussein, do you want me to take the question first, or you want Carter to take it?
So, sorry?
Who do you want to go first? Maybe let Carter answer this question first, and I'll follow up since I did it first.
Carter, okay, so Carter, go ahead, please.
I think what Mike is saying is this is a very typical question to answer. Yeah, well, I think to kind of cut to the point, at least from my experience, I haven't found any sort of very effective existing models or sort of universal frameworks that have done a great job at trying to bridge this particular gap. And I think that's for a number of reasons. One is kind of to the point I was saying that you made about sort of just the interdisciplinary nature and sort of the complexity of this whole domain, right? So a lot of this will come down to coordination and, you know, the power of specific networks and the ability to engage with different stakeholders in projects. But when you have this community coming from a variety of diverse backgrounds, sometimes a lot of those individuals don't get opportunities to talk with one another, right? So if you come from an engineering background, you might be more inclined to speak within the engineering domain. If you're coming from a legal background, you are more inclined, especially in the academic ecosystem, to focus on legal issues. and you may be less inclined to think about other issues related to PPP in a more interdisciplinary way. I would say, and I mean, just from observing Mike's work and talking about my own, I think we're a little bit unique in the sense that we try to take a more interdisciplinary approach and looking at these issues in a holistic way. But that can be very challenging because, especially in the academic world, you're not necessarily rewarded for pursuing those lines of inquiry, and you can tend to get siloed into your specific domain of expertise. So I think that's a big challenge for actually bridging the gap itself. And I think more to that point, that's why I think it's actually very important to sort of begin to have some of these dialogues, have an academic chapter like this, start to create more coordinated efforts amongst academics and practitioners in a way that we can create an open forum for us to speak with one another. And I would say, you know, if I were to make a recommendation, I think one of the most effective strategies we could possibly take to scale up this much more quickly is to use these sort of associated networks to take advantage of the scale of these different groups of stakeholders and connect different individuals to try and unpacking this problem. And Mike, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, but from my experience, it's being an academic in this sort of ecosystem can feel very lonely because you're sort of a one-man band plugging away at these types of problems. And there's not a lot of us out there actually focusing on these types of issues in this specific field. So it's always good to connect with other folks who are working on similar problems or even disparate problems, but you know that could be very interconnected in certain ways. And the challenge I think we've had as academics is coming together in a network to actually coordinate and discuss these sorts of efforts much more closely, and then engage much more systematically with industry. So yeah, I mean, I think I would say what I've been trying to support more lately is, are there opportunities to work with, you know, industry trade associations or groups like WAP where there's already a convergence of academics and or practitioners that have come together and formed networks, and whether we could leverage those existing networks to make more meaningful progress than trying to sort of myself or Mike, anyone else starting things from the ground up.
Yeah, I mean, so I can follow up on what Carter said, and I would agree, you know, kind of from the academic perspective, you know, one of the things that I think he highlighted is, you know, there really hasn't been a sustained effort, you know, in my career where there's been, you know, this network of academics who are focused on, you know, all PPPs who've worked together, you know, for an extended period of time. There have been, you know, instances here and there where I've, you know, been a part of, you know, initiatives, and you know they get going, and you know, and then for whatever reason they, you know, they don't sustain themselves. So I mean, I think that's, you know, that's an important challenge that we've got to figure out how to resolve, because, you know, I think as Carter highlighted, you know, these, you know, PPPs are, and we've talked about before, you know, PPPs are very multidisciplinary, right? So you do need a variety of perspectives, I think, to effectively address the challenges and the issues that PPPs pose. You know, and so that I think that's, you know, one aspect of the problem. I think, you know, another aspect, or, you know, one of the things that I think is a challenge that we have to address, and maybe a reality we also have to accept, is that, you know, when you are working with practitioners, you know, the vast majority of them, you know, are looking for a deliverable of some sort or something of value, you know, in a relatively short time frame, right? You know, they don't necessarily have the long game in mind. This, I mean, some do. I should be fair, but a good number of practitioners don't think of this in the long term, and so their perspective is like if they're going to be engaged with you in some kind of research effort, they would expect something out of it, in a in a 1 to 2 year time frame, and that's pretty difficult to produce anything of significant value in that short time frame. So that's another aspect of this that I think that we have to deal with. Now, I think one of the things that Carter mentioned, though, was engaging with these kinds of existing practitioner networks, organizations that are already in existence. As an example, the American Road and Transportation Builders Association here in the United States, commonly referred to as ARTBA, they have a P3 division. And 10 years ago, well, about 20 years or so, they've been holding a conference, and I would say, maybe 10, 15 years ago, academics weren't even a part of this conference. Now with some time, academics are a part of this conference. In fact, I'll be there next week, participate in that conference. And so those are the kinds of, I think, connections that have to be made. And unfortunately, when you make those sort of connections, it takes some time to build a relationship with these organizations till you get to a point where they can see the potential value of, having academics involved. And so I think that's one avenue that needs to be explored and pursued more. And then I think this is a different sort of answer to the question, but I think when it comes to looking at PPPs, probably got to expand the approaches that we take to address the problem. I mean, I think case study, so I'm talking about now research methods. I mean, so you on the one end of the spectrum, you've got case studies. On the other end of the spectrum, you got, statistical analyses and whatnot. And I think Carter and I are both, experienced with and potentially proponents of, QCA, which I think is, one of those research methods that has the potential to, help explain phenomena like PPPs, in a way that we can't do, with case studies alone, or that we can't do statistically because we don't have the data sets, right? And so I just thought I would mention that too, because I think that, because I'm actually dealing with this issue right now and in trying to respond to a comment or review from a paper that's been submitted about, like, why aren't you using the information from this paper, to correlate it with performance, or outcomes from PPPs. My answer to that is pretty simple, is because I can't use this one factor and sort of say this is why, a schedule or a cost associated with a set of PPP projects, it was the causative relationship there, so but if you did a bigger QCA type study where you're looking at things like risk allocation, and what other types of factors you want to look at, you might be able to make those connections. And so I guess I thought I would, make that point, as well as I think as an academic community, we've got to, I think, be more, more open to using appropriate research methods to address the kind of problems that we're talking about.
Mike, and if I could add on to that, so for folks who don't know what he's referring to, QCA is qualitative comparative analysis, which is sort of it has some elements of quantitative modeling and comparative power that is sort of non-existent in single case study work, but is not, it's used in small to medium end size studies that maybe don't have the same number of observations you might get in a large statistical analysis. And I think, I'm really happy Mike brought up that methodological approach, because it's one that I think is becoming much more advantageous in PPP research, since we in this community tend to, deal with data that sort of falls into that small to medium n signs range. So, I think, yeah, in terms of actually trying to bridge the gap between academics and practice, on our side of the coming from the academic community, we're trying to make efforts to advance certain methodological approaches that could be advantageous, and trying to generate more insights from the existing data streams and information that we can gather at this particular stages. I'm sure Mike has his own opinions about this, but I think for a lot of the academic literature nowadays, we see a lot of sort of some of the same methodological approaches, whether it's case studies, whether it's surveys, whether it's other things of that sort, that have to a certain degree become somewhat stale and repetitive. And I think that's another challenge that we're running into, is that while a lot of the industry is trying to push forward and generate new insights, in some ways, I think we as academics are stuck with certain problems, spinning our gears, sort of rehashing the same sort of issues that have been routinely analyzed for the last 10 to 15 years. And Mike, I don't know if you would agree with that or not, but so that makes that also creates a certain disconnect between the industry and academic communities, because it sort of then feels like we're out of touch with the industry, because they're looking at new problems and we're still stuck trying to rehash old issues. And that's partly related to the constraints that we have in our world, but it's also related to other things like methodological issues and so forth.
Now, I would tend to agree with what Carter just said, and there are lots of reasons for that. Some of it is definitely driven by the environment in which, most of us work. I mean, we're judged by, our scholarship, how many papers we produce, and those sorts of things. And so sometimes, those products, while important to us academically, may or may not have, the value that the practitioners are looking for, or as I think Carter just mentioned, the insights that practitioners are looking for.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, I think, as you guys mentioned, I think this is a two-way relationship between practitioners and academics. And now, from our side as academics, I would say we need to somehow, if I want to add some new ideas about, in addition to what Mike and Carter mentioned, I would say sometimes we need to simplify things, not to make things very complex as we normally think as scholars, as scientists. Because if we want to have a common language with practitioners, we need to make things practical and make things usable. And the fact that Michael said, that the challenge that Mike said in terms of the I would say the outline that we want from our research in comparison with what practitioners may want from us. I think as I said, it's like a two-way. We need to go some step forward, and then ask them to also do the same. And also, what I can I would say summarize is the importance of networking. I would say importance of common language, which is general, not just between practitioners and academics, but also the importance of networking, the importance of having some mixed events, some webinars, seminars, conferences between practitioners and academics. What I think is sometimes we as academics are somehow are shy to go and to present our findings in the events of practitioners. I think that's our mission. We need to step down we need to accept that those students that someday were our students now are very strong managers of large companies. So we can just talk to them and to basically share ideas and to create this environment of sharing information and knowledge. And that would benefit both sides. Perfect. So let me go to the third question. In the third question now, I would like to be more specific in terms of case studies. And I would like to ask you, my friends, that can you share a case study where academic research directly influenced a PPP project? And if so, what were the outcomes and key takeaways from this experience? So,
Sure. So I'll go first since maybe we're just keep sort of flip-flopping who goes first. So I think, you know, one example that I can share from my experience was you know, a project, you know, that we were able to do with the Department of Transportation here in the United States, you know, probably about 10 years ago now. And I think I should preface this by saying, you know, prior to doing this project, you know, there was probably about a 5-year effort on our part to work with this DOT, you know, to build a level of trust and, you know, to deliver things to them over time where, you know, they got, I would say, the confidence and, you know, the expectation or realize that, you know, we could deliver things that they were looking for, you know, to essentially get them interested in funding a larger study, right? So it was an incremental effort to get to this example that I'm giving you. And so in this particular case, you know, in the United States, at least, you know, when you're conducting a procurement in a competitive PPP environment, you may or may not allow what are known as alternative technical concepts in the proposals that are received from the respondents to request for proposals. So, you know, what an alternative technical concept or an ATC is you've got your baseline standards or illustrative design or what have you in your procurement documents, and then proposers come forward with alternatives to those baseline documents. You know, so for example, they may have a different type of pavement design if we're talking about, you know, a highway that they would prefer to use over what the standard pavement spec is, you know, in the project or in the RFP documents. And so what we did for that particular DOT is that we did a number of case studies looking at, because they at that point in time were not using ATCs as part of their procurement process. And so we did a number of case studies of other DOTs in the United States examining, you know, their ATC processes, how they worked. We had a number of interviews we conducted with practitioners about, you know, the pros and cons of the different ATC processes, you know, the value of, you know, the ATCs that were received, and so forth. And so as a result of that research, you know, we presented the report, you know, back to this public agency. And, you know, as a consequence of the work that we did, you know, they started to then incorporate ATCs not only in their PPP program, but also into their design build program. And so I think that's a pretty tangible example of, you know, an effort that we undertook, you know, that had direct impact on, you know, the way that they conduct their PPP program. I think that, you know, Carter's already highlighted, you know, I think the Netherlands is you know, is really an excellent example of a place where over time, you know, academic institutions in the Netherlands have created very, very good relationships with particularly the public sector agencies in the Netherlands, to where, you know, they yeah, they do a lot of participant observation research, in the Netherlands, and that's a consequence again of developing these relationships over time and being able to conduct investigations that are pretty unique, I think, in the PPP space. And so I think those are just a couple examples, personal example, and then a broader example of what I've seen impacting PPPs directly from the research community.
Carter, thank you, Mike and Carter.
Yeah, so I think some of the examples that I'll bring forward will be a little bit more programmatic in nature relative to the individual projects. One that I know it's not from personal experience, but I know that has been going on in the US and has been a really interesting initiative. And Mike, your university, and I guess Stanford is part of it as well, is the Build America Center that is being hosted by the University of Maryland, is directly supported by the US Department of Transportation in the United States. And so that specific innovative finance center is directly connecting sort of the policy side and a lot of the practitioner community with specific research institutions. So the Build America Center is consisted of the main hub is University of Maryland, and then you've got Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, Purdue, and Stanford involved in those specific efforts. And I guess while I think we would prefer there to be a little bit more research involved in that specific center, what's been really interesting about those efforts being spearheaded by Maryland is that the academic institutions have actually taken a very large leading role in providing technical assistance to various localities around the US and providing insight so that they can get access to federal funds, so that they can start to think about how to do PPP projects. So that's been a very interesting collaboration, and there's a lot to build on from there going forward and develop, sort of deeper relationships. And I think that's done a really nice job of creating a more cohesive network of academics and institutions that focus on this type of work and how they can directly relate and influence specific PPP programmatic efforts in the States. So I think that's one domestically that has been quite interesting. Personally, I've found it to be very interesting to actually work with multilateral institutions that are focusing on specific challenges related to PPP markets in certain regions throughout the world. So, for example, working with folks who specialize in PPP at the Inter-American Development Bank, trying to understand specific needs of those PPP markets, the institutional challenges, the opportunities for market development, market growth, increasing investment activity. So some of those engagements have been quite interesting because while I focus more on sort of the analytical side and sort of the research elements that might inform our understanding of those markets and the development of those sort of PPP programs, if you will, and the pipelines and factors that influence those have sort of direct tangible bearing on how sort of that institution is thinking about advising its member countries for specific projects and the delivery of projects and understanding best practices and those sorts of things. So I felt some of those engagements have been very helpful. And I know other academics do similar things. And I think, continuing those engagements can be very helpful to kind of create those linkages at scale. And yeah, so I think those are sort of two of my main examples of how I felt sort of the academic work that I've been doing recently, and then just what I've observed have had sort of direct bearing on, whether it's individual projects or programs of projects, or, you know, all the other sort of complex vectors that go into putting together a PPP market, if you will. It's been really interesting to see how those efforts have come together.
Interesting, thank you. It's interesting for me to see that it is all about engagement, not between persons, but also even between institutions. If we want to make things happen, if we want to influence, as you said, we need to engage with other institutions, either universities or some other institutions like multilateral development banks, to make like a change and impact the society. That's interesting. So let me jump into the next question, about which is relevant and is in fact about best practices and lessons learned. Carter, can you share with us, based on your experience, some best practices for fostering effective collaboration between academic researchers and industry practitioners in PPPs? And if there's any specific lessons that you want to share with us.
Yeah, so no, this is an interesting question. I think I might go back to some of the points that we had raised a little bit earlier. I think part of what's very intriguing about this specific effort, focusing, you know, trying to develop an academic nexus and so forth through WAP, is you know, at this stage, I think if we're really set on trying to move the needle on this issue, my general take is we need to be more strategic in these specific arrangements. And personally, I don't think it makes a lot of sense for someone like myself or Mike to kind of go out there alone and try and develop our own network. I mean, it's one that's somewhat impractical, and two, you know, it's not really core to our overall job description. But what I can say is that we have a number of these organizations and trade associations that are partnering. ART was a good example that Mike brought up. We've got WAP, you know, there's the Infrastructure Project Finance Association, there's a Global Infrastructure Investment Alliance, there's another major organization in the US is the Association for the Improvement of American Infrastructure, which is a nonprofit organization that very much focuses on the P3 industry. So my recommendation would be for us as academics to engage much more directly with those existing organizations that already have a very strong convening power in terms of their ability to bring a lot of the industry together in one pace. So, and I think if we as academics can forge stronger relationships with those institutions who have a broader membership set, we can do a better job of not only disseminating our insights and our work to that community so it can help inform, you know, projects going forward, but also more easily engage with that membership and those institutions and those organizations in a way that is much more scalable than myself or Mike or anyone else going out trying to organize our own individual networks of industry folks that we know. So I think that would be my recommendation for more efficient collaborative efforts to try and get academics and practitioners together. And I think doing that, we can make some meaningful progress.
I think yeah, so I'll just echo what I think Carter just said. You know, he mentioned the Build America Center. I think the Build America Center is a great example of this type of broad collaboration. You know, so I mean, he mentioned the academic institution involved, but it also has, you know, engagement with consultant company, you know, some consulting companies. So you know, they're part of the center as well. And then there's a whole network of partners, you know, that are either public or private, you know, professional organizations that are supporting the center, and though, you know, and it's the nexus of all of that I think is making what the Build America Center's done over the last 2 years and then still going forward, you know, possible. And it's, you know, so I would agree with Carter that it, you know, you've got to, I think, you know, reach out to these organizations that have, you know, the ability to impact, you know, already have large networks of practitioners involved, and then have the ability to impact and disseminate that, you know, amongst their membership, you know. So you know, I'm doing some work not related to, you know, PPPs, but for the American Council of Engineering Companies. You know, and again, it's a small project, but it's an example of the type of work that, again, I think it's going to have a large impact, you know, not because I'm doing anything terribly special, but because it's being done for an organization that's, you know, got a membership base of over 2,000, maybe 3,000, you know, engineering companies here in the United States. And so I think making those kind of connections is really, really important to trying to, you know, to have an impact and to make the work that we do more relevant.
And Mike, to that point, I think a lot of this, and this goes back to sort of what you said earlier, a lot of this starts with just getting more academic voices in the room within some of these organizations, right? So getting them more comfortable, like welcoming folks like us into their discourse to you know, and actually being open to having, you know, letting us have a critical eye on things as to how we view the world versus how they view the world, and being receptive to that. And so I think that's a big first step that needs to happen, is, you know, because like Mike, you mentioned, for the longest time, it sort of felt like we as academics were not really part of a lot of these industry conversations. But I think that's slowly changed over time for the better, as I think there's been a growing appreciation for the type of value that we as academics can provide to folks in the industry to better understand their problems and some of the challenges that they might be facing. And then I think that will only be amplified, you know, when you start working with these larger organizations and institutions that have very large member bases, and may very well be in the driver's seat in terms of influencing standards and policy in certain jurisdictions, whether that's in the US or elsewhere.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, what we are trying to do, in fact, is align with what you mentioned in terms of, first of all, we need to cohort our, I would say, endeavors in VAP in terms of building like a strong network of academics and practitioners within VAP. And I know Ziad and the other, I would say, executive members of VAP are trying days and nights to connect with large organizations worldwide. And once we have our resources ready, then we can, as you thoroughly mentioned, we can share our resources in, I mean, the academic body and the network with other organizations. That's very important point. Thank you. And my last question before checking if there is any specific question from our audience is about the future directions. Mike, would you like to conclude your speech with the future directions, that looking ahead, what do you see as the future trends in PPP research and practice could be to foster this, I would say, collaboration between practitioners and academics?
So Hossein, I mean, you know, this is you know, multifaceted question. I can answer it in a variety of ways. I mean, you know, I think that I'll just reiterate the point that I think one of the important things that has to be done with the research that's taking place is it's done in collaboration, with the right partners. So the right partners, depends upon the problem. Like, what is the problem? What's the question that you're trying to answer? And it's going to be, because of the nature of PPPs, it's going to probably involve a practitioner community or a set of communities in one way or another. So I think that's one important thing that I think is really important going forward. In terms of particular topics, I think in the United States at least, I think there is a lot of attention and being given to what I'll call collaborative approaches to developing projects. What some people in the United States are now referring to as progressive models, which has its roots in alliancing, which came out of Australia and so forth. And so I think there's a lot of interest in, when do progressive models make sense? Do progressive models outperform, or are they a better option than more conventional approaches to project delivery and PPPs? I mean, I think that's an area that's very hot right now in the United States. Another that I would suggest is, for lack of a better word, is integrated development. Where you are using PPPs to try to bring together multiple sectors of your economy to try to make things happen. So, in the U.S., one of the areas that I think is getting a lot of attention, is the connection between real estate development or retail development and transportation hubs or transportation modes. That's another area that I think is going to get a lot of attention, because that just increases the complexity of the problem, because now you're not talking about, okay, we're trying to develop a program associated with transportation systems. Now we're talking about developing projects or programs that are involving different sectors of your economy, which are going to be even more challenging to implement. So those are some of the things that I see on the horizon. I've already mentioned the fact that I think we've got to employ the right methods for the given problem, and be more open as an academic community to working with not only different academic partners, but trying to enlist the support from, like I said, the right partners that are from the practitioner community. The unfortunate part of that, I think, with the practitioner community is that, at least in my experience, it takes some time to get, to create those relationships, to get to the point where, you can have a voice, at the table, or you can be involved and get them engaged in your research, so it's not something that happens overnight, and it takes a certain amount of perseverance, for sure. I mean, so I think that's probably an important thing to keep in mind, is that sometimes you just got to keep plugging away and taking some small victories, because over time, those build into larger victories. I think this Build America Center that Carter mentioned, that I'm a part of, is a good example of incremental progress over a course of really decades to get to the point where the federal government in the United States has the confidence in a set of academic institutions leading a center like this. That would not have been the case a decade ago, no question in my mind. A decade ago, they'd have been looking at the big consulting companies, or to be leading these kind of efforts. So it takes some time to do these things.
And Carter, please.
Yeah, sure. So I would echo Mike's sentiment about progressive models. We've written a little bit about that as things were heating up in the North American market. My understanding is there's another, Mike, you got another active project going on that specific issue with the folks that I'm affiliated with at George Mason. So obviously it's still a very relevant subject. And I would say there's international implications for that as well, because it's not just North America that's thinking about sort of more collaborative approaches to PPP. I know the Australians are very much investigating how you might, sort of blend different delivery models together. So take the benefits of PPP and sort of merge them with other, tangible benefits found in alliancing contracts and sort of create a hybrid structure. So I know there are active discussions down there. So I think a lot of people are thinking about sort of what's the next evolution of the PPP model. Mike, as you said, transit-oriented development, big deal in the States. And then a few other research directions that I think will be particularly interesting going forward. I think there's still sort of not a lot of work focusing on the relationship between PPP and sustainable development, climate transition, those types of things. We could probably, make more concerted efforts to look at those interlinkages and those connections, whether it's, how do these types of models help deliver adaptation and mitigation infrastructure? What are some of the new business models around that? How do you facilitate additional institutional capital from private markets into these sorts of sectors through these types of models, those sorts of things? Those are sort of big existential challenges that we haven't really cracked yet. I think, a few other sort of more specific topics, outside of we just need to keep doing more evaluative studies, like looking at performance, building a bigger evidence base. I'm a big, proponent of that. But also other areas that haven't got a lot of attention, but a lot of governments are going to start grappling with. I know the UK is grappling with this right now, is, what do you do when it comes to contract expiry and handback? How do you think about the end stages of PPP projects? And, whether those projects are reconcession, whether they're actually handed back to the public sector. How do we think about those governance challenges and the appraisal of those projects and a way forward for them? That's becoming more and more of a pressing issue, especially for markets that have a lot of mature projects. So I think that's going to be a very important topic. And then I think lastly, a research topic that I think needs a little bit more attention, but hasn't gotten a lot of it so far is related to PPP procurement cancellation. So I know the Partnerships Bulletin just came out with a story about, the top 10 biggest PPP pipelines in the world right now, listing a whole host of countries that are trying to put together a robust set of pipelines related to projects. One of the comments I made about sort of those efforts is, well, okay, it's one thing to, have a pipeline of projects. It's another thing when those projects actually get into procurement and construction. And sort of, in a lot of ways, pipelines are very aspirational. The question is, what actually gets delivered. In the US, we've had a lot of notable examples of, procurements being canceled for political reasons or otherwise, even at very late stages when contracts are being awarded and so forth. So I think we need to pay a little bit more attention to those types of risks and issues, and especially, given all the complexity that is associated with these types of projects, and understand more systematically how these projects are faring when they're moving through the pipeline. So when they're moving through those early planning and development stages through procurement and into construction, and see if there's any efficiencies we can glean. to, you know, deliver projects better, assuming we are delivering the right set of projects. That's an entirely separate question.
Yeah, thank you. And if I want to add, I would say some research on sustainability development goals, or in more general terms on sustainability and resilience of infrastructure, could be like another direction of research that we can impact as academics, the world, the globe, I would say. So now let me see the questions that we have. We have one question, in fact, and one suggestion I can see in the Q&A session. Our friends, if you have some other question, you can share it with us. But the question from Iyad Omesh is how we can minimize the gap. I would say you answered that, but Michael, can you just give us like a very short answer to this question, how we can minimize the gap and who will take this responsibility? You're muted, Mike.
So I mean, you know, that's part of, you know, part of the reason I think why we're here today, you know, to be quite honest with you. You know, so I think the steps toward minimizing the gap are, you know, are efforts like this, where you're trying to create networks of academics, right, and potentially practitioners. And then, as you mentioned before, you know, Hossein, I think it's important, you know, to engage, right? I mean, we I think as academics sometimes are probably a little reticent to get, you know, out in front of the practitioner community to present things that we're doing, work that we're doing, results, and so forth. But I think that's extremely important for two reasons. One, it helps to build your credibility, right? Because you're going to need that when you're trying to partner with practitioners. And then two, it provides another source of vetting of the work that you're doing, because, you know, while whatever you're doing might resonate with, you know, a group of academics, you know, that may or may not resonate with, you know, practitioners. And they are, I think, a really valuable source of, you know, our litmus tests of, you know, of the utility of the things that we're doing, right? Because at the end of the day, I think, you know, this is definitely, you know, I think the work that we do is in the realm of what I call pracademic, you know, type of research, right? I mean, we're not trying to, you know, we're doing science for the sake of science. We're doing this, you know, for the sake of trying to impact, you know, the way that projects get delivered and so forth. And so, you know, that's, I guess, my short answer to, maybe not so short, but my short answer to how you maybe start to try to minimize that gap.
Thank you. And Carter, would you like to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, you know, the question really gets to the point of kind of why we're here today, to try and sort of bolster these efforts to create more interconnections between academia and industry. You know, trying to use, in this case, the convening power of WAP to put more emphasis on this particular issue, which I think is great. And, you know, I think, like Mike said, we as academics have to be a little bit more comfortable sort of sticking our neck out, you know, getting out of our ivory towers, if you will, to share the work that we're conducting, and also be ready to receive critical feedback from the industry folks and be receptive to their criticisms and suggestions for directions that we should be taking. I mean, hopefully that also comes with, you know, additional collaboration and partnership, whether that's through data access, whether that's through funding, whether that's through a whole host of other things. But as long as we can, develop relationships where we as academics can still independently pursue lines of inquiry that are beneficial to the industry. I think that's always a good thing. So, part of that is just being more comfortable doing that. And, like you said, Hussein, it's a two-way street. So it's also having, having the industry partners get comfortable with us and understanding where we fit in sort of the value chain and what our value proposition is. And so, part of that is, getting out of our comfort zone and also trying to, support efforts like this where we can put together a stronger nexus of academics and practitioners. I know there used to be a P3 Scholars Network that existed for quite a while, dating back a number of years, that, I think ever since the pandemic, that Scholars Network never really reconnected.
Yeah.
But there was sort of a small effort of academics, trying to sort of link up and coordinate and share ideas on research. And so I'm excited that, maybe this could be one part of, trying to revitalize those efforts to build those networks, not only amongst academics, but then develop that into broader connections with the industry community. So I think we need that now.
May I ask a couple of questions, Hussein?
Sure, go ahead, yeah.
Actually, I have three things on my mind. One is, the value of developing a course that can be like even a 2-hour session that can be delivered to business administration and MBA programs around the world, a WAP session, let's say, about PPP, because if you're studying business these days, I think it's important for you to have some understanding of what PPP is. Your thoughts on that? Second is, what about small-scale PPPs? Would that be a subject of research that you think we can get people interested in? And the third one is, there are some university programs like Toyo University that has a program on PPP. But also there's a lot of people that I hear, people say, I have a PhD in PPP. How can we help with that? How can we help people get that? So the last 10 minutes, I know you're too much to answer, but just any quick thoughts on these things would be great.
So,
Yeah, Michael.
sure. So Ziad, your first question, what was your first question again?
Sorry, my first question was about WAP creating a 2-hour
Oh, of
module.
course. Oh, yeah. I think so. I'm going to answer. I think your questions, at least two of them, a little bit broadly. So as I started my academic sort of career, I was also engaged with looking at infrastructure management, which I think is a natural sort of parallel with PPPs. And at least within the United States, folks that were studying infrastructure management at the time, were kind of lone rangers, if you will. They're out there on their own. And so we were able to create a community of folks who came together and held each summer what we called a boot camp. And so and it kind of migrated from university to university. And so the idea there was that faculty from the participating institutions would send their PhD students to this boot camp, and they'd spend a week at whatever institution, and they'd share their research. They'd also get presentations from participating faculty and so forth. And so it became a little mini course in PPPs. And so I think that model is one that maybe this community ought to think about. You know, and then to your specific question about, you know, something for the business community, you know, and academic institutions, I mean, I would wholeheartedly, you know, endorse that idea, because it still baffles me to this day that if you look at most business you know, MBA curriculums, you don't find courses in project finance. I mean, they just don't teach the subject, which is still kind of mind blowing, given how much is developed on a project finance basis. And so I think that's a great idea. Your question about small scale development, to me, I think that's very, very relevant, you know, because from my perspective, you know, we focus too much on scale when it comes to PPPs and not on complexity. I think the complexity is the bigger driver of PPPs than how large or small a project might be, you know. So I mean, I think you can find, let's just say, a $250 million US project, or even $150 million US project that's got, you know, a very high level of complexity because it's maybe multimodal, if it's in the transportation sector, you know, that can be done as a PPP, you know, versus, you know, more conventional approaches. So that's my short answers to your questions.
And Carter, would you like to answer maybe the question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm equally baffled by the sheer lack of engagement amongst business schools with this specific subject matter. I find it hard to believe that business schools don't want to touch anything related to infrastructure finance. I think it might be just due to the fact that they think it's engineering, so it's not business, but infrastructure is a big business. So I think that is a very big missed opportunity in the business school community. It's also
Sorry,
creating a lot of
interrupt you, but may I just clarify something? You know, I think maybe take it out of the context of infrastructure, because you know, I mean, if we were to provide a course, a 2-hour course that we offer to universities that says this is about public-private partnership, a lot of it is used for infrastructure, but nowadays a lot of it is used for plain delivery of services, social services and other things like that. And that is a major part of every government's operations nowadays, whether they call it PPP or they don't. So I mean, I just wanted to make that so that you can continue your line of thinking.
I think that makes sense. What I'm sort of saying is I think there's been a reluctance on the part of business schools to engage with this second, partially I think for that reason, because it's related to the infrastructure community. So it's like that's an engineering thing. It's part of the reason why, you know, I still sit in an engineering school, Mike's sitting in an engineering school. I mean, we have other folks from different disciplines who focus on this subject from different academic communities, but you know, you can sort of see how those sort of legacy relationships you know, can create some issues. But I think you're totally right that, you know, this can be broader than infrastructure, if you will. Although, you know, there's also other questions about, is it, in my opinion, I think we don't, at least in the business community, in the business side, on the private sector, there seems to be a lot stronger expertise when it comes to PPP. Maybe there's not formal training in the academic communities, if you will, but a lot of people get skilled up in different parts of the industry to understand these sorts of questions and problems and things of that sort. Where I see sort of a bigger dearth of training is in more of the public administration disciplines, where you've got the folks who are actually sitting in those government capacities who need to prepare and procure the projects and understand those PPP processes, and they have no training on these types of complexities. They have no understanding of how project finance works. And so there's, I think there's a broader issue related to just fundamental training. I think offering sort of an introductory session would be good to get people somewhat familiar that this exists as a modality. But I think more in-depth training is going to be needed at the end of the day, because you can only accomplish so much in 2 hours, right? And then I echo Mike's point about small scale PPPs. I think we focus a little bit too much on dollar size, whether it's a mega project or it has to be at least 500 million, or whatever the criteria is. I don't think having smaller projects precludes the use of PPP. Again, it will all come down to the nature of the project, right?
So I mean, I think that maybe that's what I meant, was just a taster, not a full training, but for people to get an idea of what it is. And also, you mentioned something that's very interesting. You talked about public administration, and there are degrees in public administration, MBAs in public administration. And I don't know to what extent some universities are offering PPP courses, but not everybody that's offering public administration is. And before just so that we don't miss it, and I apologize for, I budge in all the time on things. I apologize, but I just wanted to point your attention, Hussein, everybody, to Alex Ndoura's comment in the chat, because I've met Alex, and in Uganda they have a program for PPP at the Uganda Management Institute. That's interesting. So especially if you're in Africa, do look into that.
Yeah, thank you, Ziad. Yeah, I wanted also to let our audience know that Raymond has also shared some information in the chat box. In addition to that, Sebastian Alonso suggested that he has like a database of 250 Colombian infrastructure contracts and is willing to share this data with us if we want to do research. So it would be fantastic if we have the information so that we can contact him. So I think we are very close to the end of the session. It's an interesting session. This is just the inaugural webinar of the academic chapter. This is just the start. I want to make sure that Michael and Carter has shared with us their final remark before I close the session. Mike.
I guess I'll just say that I believe, I think this hopefully was a productive session. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak, share some of my thoughts today. Looking forward to collaboration going forward, because I think if it hasn't become clear, I think developing networks and collaborating with the right partners is going to be extremely important to trying to advance, the knowledge base when it comes to public-private partnerships.
And Carter?
Yeah, no, again, I think I would just echo what Mike said, and, I think we need more of these types of efforts, and I don't think it's going to take one particular organization or one particular set of institutions to make a meaningful impact in this space. I think we're going to have to see a lot more engagement across the board. But if we feel that this is important enough to pursue, then hopefully we can make some inroads. And again, to Mike's point about the Build America Center, it took quite a number of years to get into a position where that was actually became a reality. But I don't see why partnerships and arrangements and other sorts of collaborations like that or otherwise can't become more commonplace. So I think we just, need to keep pushing the envelope and maintain our momentum.
Perfect, thank you. Jaber, would you like to add any points?
Yeah, just the webinar was very informative. Just wanted to say thanks to Mike, Carter, and to you, Hussein and Ziad, and to the audience.
Thank you. And Ziad, would you like to add your ending? Oh, okay. So as the ending remark, I would also like to mention once again that we believe VAP is a neutral place to create, at least to start and create that network of academics and practitioners. And once we have like enough resources in VAP, within VAP, I'm sure that we can connect with other organizations that we are already also connected and build up on this basically initiatives. We want to try for the next semester, which is like in fall, we want to have at least 2 courses in which they have some mutual workshops between professors in universities. We want to start from that. In addition to that, we are building our network of academics, and right now we have 10 academics join us in the network, in the Nexus. After that, we want to basically work with VAP on that recognition program so that we can have some recognized practitioners so that we can invite them in our sessions, in our classrooms, virtually in fall. So with that, I would like to thank everybody that joined us. And this is the exact time to adjourn the session. Thank you. I would also like to thank Jaber, Ziad, and our esteemed speakers, and to everyone who participated in this inaugural webinar. Have a great day, my friends. Bye-bye.